might call this butterfly?
Owl face?
Isn't that the Luna?
Yeah, that's the owl butterfly. Yeah.
Oh.
So, so I wanted the thing is, of course, it's a mimic, right? It looks like owls. But there's a lot of debate about this. This is kind of a nice example of not taking things for granted. I think it is not two, but actually, I have a friend who collects these kind of things, and he has half a wing. And the thinking is really, they never. This is they never sit. They never sit like this. You know, this is the way they would fly through the woods, and they're crepuscular. They come out at dusk and dawn, so they are visible. But they're never going to sit upside down with their wings open like that. So it might be just a mistake, an accident, that they look like an owl. And normally they're going to sit on a branch and they fold their wings, so you only see half of it. So like that. So maybe it probably looks like a lizard. And so a predator comes along and it'll attack the head, and so that's just the wing. It doesn't hurt the animal as much as if it gets attacked in the body, or it just scares you away. And there's a debate about whether these are really scary things and mimic things, or it's just a novel color. So there's a lot of literature on that. But most people, you know, there are so many insect mimics. I could show you some of them. We can look them up online. Things that look like snakes. There's a caterpillar that has a swollen body at the tip, and it has little sutures that look like a tongue sticking out, and they actually turn and pretend to strike you. I mean, that's got to be a mimic, right? I actually think these are probably mimics too, because if a bird, you know, it's flying through the forest, and you just see that, and you're a bird, and you're underneath, and you think, I'll go up and get that. That looks like an owl, I think. It doesn't have to study it. You know, just, owl, you know, it's coming my way. I'm getting out of here. So I think it is an owl mimic. Yep.
Brian, the morpho that has the blue on, they also have the eyes underneath.
Yeah, on the other side, I don't have.
That one.
Yeah. These are blue morphos. These are from
those
Billy's.
wonderful eyes.
If you go to the butterfly house, you see these. How many have been to the butterfly house? Yeah, so it's worth it. They have some of the big stick-like spiny leaf insects, and they sometimes have whip spiders, which a friend of mine used to use. They didn't bring any of them.
Up close, can't you?
I could probably pull this out. I left at home one of the broken feathers of one of these wings of one of these guys. So yeah, and they're you know, a tropical thing. All these are tropical things. There's a lot more diversity in the tropics. A favorite one, spinosad. It's a toxin that comes from bacteria. This is a great research story. They discovered it in the rum distillery in Barbados. I bet that was a fun project.
Yeah.
What made this guy think that, okay, I'm going to see if this will kill insects. You know, let's try that. And then I can see the grant, you know. You're NSF. I need $1 million to go to Barbados and study rum distilleries. Because I might get some really good pesticides out of there. Yeah, right, buddy. But he did, whoever did, found this stuff that's now, everybody uses it. And just because it's organic doesn't necessarily mean it's not toxic. It's actually very toxic to predatory insects. It doesn't hurt people, apparently. And things will get resistant to it eventually. So if you just use spray, and it's a profit motive too. It's kind of a science reductionism, and you get money selling a product. You know, if you want to sell something in Arbico, telling people to reduce polycultures doesn't sell a product. So there's a lot more money into finding products to spray on your crops, not telling you how to plant so you don't need them, right? So that's a problem. So what you should try to do is remember that when you spray an insect, you're spraying the whole world. You know, so insects in a crop are part of a larger, you know, food web and a chain and an agroecosystem with other insects and predators and birds and us and farm workers and the whole world, right? And all that stuff goes downstream somewhere. So when you spray, you're spraying everybody. And the food web is part of that concept, and you probably all learned about food webs in school, right? So it's a quaint concept. It actually really is a useful concept in ecology, just to think how everything's connected and how they actually are connected, who eats who and who's benefiting who, and some of them are mutualist connections, and when you pull on this, something over here happens. That really is true. And it's a big part of trying to figure out what to do about pests other than just spray them all. So I'm going to inflict a few graphs and lines on things on you, but a little science. So this is a food web for insects in crops, for example. And it just points out that if you look at a farm field, there's not just crop and maybe one of the herbivores that's eating it is a pest, but there's other plants, you know, other crops, weeds that are a host for some of these plants. And there's lots of herbivorous insects. And there's a lot of predators eating them, not just maybe one or two eating yours, but other ones eating that one and all the other ones. So it's a whole network of interacting life in there that you're spraying, right? So, and there are even, these are parasitoids, and I'm going to come back to what a parasitoid is. What's a parasitoid? Anybody know? Okay, good. I always say that everyone knows this already. It's a parasite that kills its host. So there's hyperparasitoids that attack them. Like the movie Alien, I'll come back to that for sure. Everyone, we love that movie. So if you spray, so what happens if you spray this field? Just, it's a good thing to think ecologically. People started spraying these pesticides because they killed an insect in a petri dish, and oh yeah, we'll sell this to the farmers. Didn't think too hard about what else would happen. So of course DDT got in the food chain, got poisoned eagles, so, and everything, hilarity ensued. But just stop for a minute and think about it as an exercise. You look at the food chain and just see if you could anticipate, if you thought about it, what would happen. So if you spray this field, and farmers like, ideally, a pesticide that kills lots of insects, because then they only need one for all their pests. So they use what's called broad spectrum pesticides. They get the most bang for the buck that way, right? So you spray this field, what happens?
You kill all the insects.
Yeah, all the insects.
All the insects, yeah.
Right.
Even
But
the beneficials.
yeah, and not the crop. So I'm not even talking about pollinators here, but the crop's still there, right? So then what happens? You stop spraying for a while because you killed all your pests and you want to spray every day because it costs money. So then what happens?
Then they can't pollinate.
The ones that are resistant to the pesticide reproduce.
Yeah, resistance starts. But even in the short term, who comes back first? The pests, right? Because their food is still there. You're not killing your corn.
Right.
Actually, that's what GMOs are good for. I mean, GMOs are useful for farmers. It protects. It's the biggest seller, protects corn from the herbicides they like to use. So they can use a lot without killing their corn. So that's one reason there's so much more weed control and less habitat for insects, because you kill everything in the field except the crop. So they come back first. The food's still there. This is banquet waiting for the pests to come back, any ones that survive. But there's nothing for the predators to eat, because the pests aren't there back yet. They have to wait till the pests come back before there's something to eat. So actually, pesticides tend to increase the number of pests because they resurge, because when they come back, there's nothing else to eat them, and there's no predators. It's brilliant for the pesticide companies. They've killed their competition. So you have to spray and spray more. But meanwhile, they're going to come back in greater numbers. That's called resurgence. But meanwhile, as Michael is saying, all these things evolve. And so you spray, and especially the more you kill, the faster they evolve. Actually, this is the fundamental theorem of natural selection. The bigger the selective coefficient, because you're down to just the few survivors that have the gene, they get to do all the reproduction. So they get to represent the whole next generation, and their young have tons of resistance. Whereas if you just kill a few, they aren't so prominent in the population, and the resistance factor is really low. So that's one way to manage this, is to pesticides only when you really need to, and that slows the rate of resistance. But that's what happens. I'll just go to that page, next page here. This kind of just shows you spray all the herbivores, but eventually they become resistant, and you are actually having to spray again and again and more. And that's called resistance, and that's the start of the pesticide treadmill. You're on this cycle forever now. You're spraying, they're getting resistant, you come up with a new spray, they get resistant to that. And meanwhile, they also get worse because the predators are killed too. And the predators don't evolve as fast.
The decomposers, those are affected also?
Oh yeah,
Because it's
everything,
gonna go
I'm
into
just
the
talking about
soil?
to me, this is the big reason why pesticides aren't sustainable.
Yeah.
They kill wildlife, that's true, but maybe you can tolerate a little of that. They kill some of us, okay, maybe that's collateral damage, right? So they're pollution, but you can't just keep using them forever, because actually pest problems have gotten worse. Pesticides really hit the road after World War II. There are actually higher percentages of crops lost to pests now than at the beginning of that cycle. And there's more pests, because the other thing I haven't mentioned is all these other things that don't have their predators anymore, they become pests. So a lot of the major insect pests now are secondary pests. They were produced by insecticides. They weren't pests before because everything was eating them. Now you've killed everything that eats them too. And so this little corny here, this just shows, I should have done a big one too. In Nicaragua after World War II, they started spraying for boll weevil and cotton. And there was maybe one other pest, and they would spray a couple times a year. By about 5 or 10 years later, they had like 5 major pests that they were spraying for 10 times a year. So the other 3 were produced by insecticides. They're become pests because their predators are gone. And by the end, they collapsed. It was like by the 80s, the cotton industry collapsed for a while, because they just couldn't control the pests anymore. There were like 8 major pests, and they were all resistant to pesticides. And that actually started a lot of the immigration problems to the U.S. is people looking for work because they don't have their crops anymore. So I was going to say too that just part of the biology, just for the fun part too, is the predators they don't have the ability to handle the toxins, because actually this has been going on in nature forever. The pesticide treadmill, oak trees are toxic. Lots of plants will kill you if you eat them. Nature's kind of nasty, really. It's not trying to feed you most of the time. It's trying to eat you or avoid being eaten. Right? So a lot of plants you eat, they're toxic, and insects. That's because they want to avoid being eaten by insects. But part of the push for where pesticides was right after World War II. There was a big chemical industry looking for a product to sell, and so part of it was fertilizers. You had all this nitrate, which makes great explosives, and it also makes great fertilizer. And there are all these pesticides that Muller, who invented or recognized the value of DDT, got the Nobel Prize because it really helps treat tropical diseases like malaria. It was a big factor in World War II. So you're looking for but the company said, well, while we got these products that we got from war, we're going to sell them to combat insects. And it took on, that became their marketing strategy. These are products for the wars against insects. And pesticides always have these names like Bicep and Nukem and Javelin. They weren't talking about plant health. They don't think, okay, we're going to have healthy plants. I feel like a George Carlin kind of. It's like football versus baseball. Football's like, I'm going to kill those pests. Baseball's, we're going to have healthy plants and go home. So that wasn't the way it went. It went to like battle of the insects. So if you have healthy plants, one way to battle insects without pesticides is resistant plants. That they're either a variety that has a toxin that hopefully doesn't kill us too, or they're just stronger, or they have more trichomes or something that repels the insects. You can overdo it though. Sometimes if you over fertilize plants, it feeds the insects because they like that too. So you always in ecology, nothing's hard and fast rules. It's always if this then that. So you have to be wary. Sometimes people want to over fertilize and then they're just feeding the insects really. Spraying, you use beneficial insects. And you use them. So this thing about the pesticide treadmill is this whole food web's kind of a source of problems, right? You've killed all the enemies, and now you're trapped in there. But it's also a toolbox. It's a source of our lives. And if you stop spraying and then you go look for beneficial insects and beneficial diseases, like a lot of the organic pesticides like BT or spinosad are basically plant diseases, plant disease toxins. You can get viruses to infect insects. You can get fungi to affect insects. I'll show you some pictures of that. So that's a way to use the food web as a toolbox. I look for the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I look for somebody, and that's what these little Tiki grandma wasps are. They're wasps that you can raise in cards like this. I buy them like a card that's about this big, and it has 100,000 moth eggs. Wow. And usually thousands of wasps come out, but unfortunately. And what you do, I'll show you a video, but you tear these in little sections, and you tear them and you hang them in your crop. And they come swarming out and attack the eggs of your pests. Oh. And UMass recommends them for some corn and pepper pests. They used them a lot in China. I have a friend who wrote this children's book about tricky grandma wasps in China. Because they have a lot of labor and not a lot of industry when this was doing. I mean, now they're very industrial and use tons of pesticides. China uses much more than us. It's horrible. But they also do a lot of biological control and small diverse farming too. It's kind of the best of both worlds. But you can back pests. Yeah. It's a fun little children's book. It's Sigrid Schultz. She's a historian of science. It came from Australia and infected. It was cottony cushion scale in citrus in California. It was threatening the industry. So they went to Australia and they found a ladybug and a tachinid fly, and it's a parasitoid fly that lays its eggs on it, and the ladybug eats the scale. And they brought them back and they tried it in a tent for a while, and it controlled the pest. And it controlled the pests until like the 50s when they started using DDT, and it killed the ladybugs, and then the scale came back. In fact, now the best way to generate some pests experimentally is to spray a pesticide, especially an old one that they're resistant to, and then you kill all the enemies. The other thing I didn't quite finish about, enemies don't handle pest toxins as well, because all these herbivores are handling them. A lot of insects like potato beetle you're mentioning, they get resistant to pesticides really fast because they're always eating potato leaves, and they have these mixed function oxidases, these enzymes that break down natural pesticides in the plants. And so the thing is then that it's this pesticide treadmill that's going on, but by the time the predators get them, usually a lot of that stuff's been eaten or sequestered. They have to deal with some pest insects that are toxic, but by and large they don't have to deal with toxins as much, so they aren't as good at it. And they don't reproduce as fast because they're bigger. They have to eat they have to be like a lion versus rabbits. They have to be big enough to handle prey. So they just don't, they can't keep up. So they don't evolve resistance as fast as the pests. So So I'm going to tell you just some stories. So this will get into some insect stories because this is all very, dry kind of pesticide treadmill stuff. But what do you do instead of the pesticides? Some of it's using these enemies in various ways. Either you establish them, or you create a habitat that they like, or you release them in numbers as a kind of a biological insecticide. But you're using enemies. And the big advantage of that is if you do it right, evolution works for you instead of against you, because then they can co-evolve. Right? And I like this story too. This is UMass and U of Connecticut developed this one pest management system. It's a perimeter trap crop. And some gardeners use this too. It's a little harder on a small scale. And this is a squash field. This is Ruth Hazard from many years ago. She's since retired. Showing it to farmers where you have and this is kind of a map of it. Can you see, am I this working? Yeah. So this is winter squash, and it's surrounded by a perimeter of an old heirloom variety that has high levels of cucurbitacin. So pesticide treadmill in nature. This is striped cucumber beetle. They have learned to handle that toxin. The plant makes this toxin as its own little pesticide to control the pest. But the pest has broken that one, and it has now learned to use that as a signal. Oh, there's dinner. It's like, I think this is like hot sauce. I hate hot sauce. Everyone eats hot sauce. It's trying to kill you, But some people, some of you guys seem to like it, okay. Actually, it probably helps you in your gut, kill some of your bad gut flora. That's one thing. So, again, it's a food web. You are a food web. Everything going on in your gut, you've got enemies and friends of your enemy, all that stuff. So these guys, the striped cucumber beetle, let me go back here and get back. They love, so what you do is you plant a perimeter of this high pesticide crop, and they all stay there. And when they come in from hibernation, they just stay there. And all you have to do is spray the perimeter. Or we try vacuum cleaners, so it's a non-toxic thing. You can just, because it's a little area you're doing, and that, it's using their behavior against them. So that's part of the fun of this. If you get into pest management, instead of just spraying chemicals, how can I think of a way to trick the insect or use an insect against it? It's really, using ecology instead of chemistry. So it's kind of fun to get into the behavior of these insects. These guys, what you can do too is we got carried a little further. You can do what's called push-pull. So this is we put the squash plants in surround, which is a clay coating when they're seedlings, and you plant the seedlings, which gives them a head start over weeds. And it looks like it would kill it, but enough light gets through, and the insects don't like that. There's a few flea beetles there, but the striped cucumber beetle doesn't really like it very much, right? Oh, and I was going to say one more punchline about the striped cucumber beetle. So you wonder if these insects are beating the plant toxins. A classic question for ecologists is, why is the world still green? You think there's a tree out there for 100 years, it's not evolving. And there's insects every year, generations learning to beat whatever poison it's got. How can the plants survive? How can they all survive? Why aren't they all succumbing to the pesticide treadmill? Well, it's predators, No one's spraying their predators. There's all these predators out there that are natural that are keeping their levels low. So it's partly plants defending themselves, and it's partly their help. They've got an enemy of their enemy, right? So these cucumber beetles, that's probably why they aren't overrunning the world either, right? But you can do this push-pull, and so what you got is a combination of the factors. You have the crop repels them, and then there's an attractive crop around it. So there's a push and a pull. And so you don't have, sometimes you don't even have to spray at all. You just sacrifice the border plants. And we found too, if you put a few in the middle of the field, that's a nice sink. So it's a way to take their behavior and say, okay, I'll put a few in the middle. Any ones who find their way into the field past the barrier, they come to these, they smell, oh boy, dinner. And they come and you just spray those crops, or you let those grow. It's a tiny percentage of your crop. Right? So you get it? So behavior, you're using the behavior of the insect against it to minimize pesticide use. And the other thing is you're not spraying the whole field, so you're preserving natural enemies. So a big theme for me of all these controls is find a way to control an insect that does not kill everything else, including all the natural enemies. Special herbicides, special insecticides, for example, very focused ones instead of broad spectrum ones is key too. So a lot of the biologicals and organics like BT, if you're a gardener, you probably use BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. That's a bacteria that was discovered in soil that's toxic to insects. And it makes a little spore that germinates in their gut and kills them. So they have to eat it, and they have to have a basic gut, and they can't be a predator. Your predator's not going to eat that stuff. So it's very specific to Lepidoptera. And I left home my box of examples of pesticides, but there's one for mosquitoes too. It works, and there's one for Colorado potato beetle. So it's very specific, and it doesn't hurt predators. So that's one way to go with pesticides. It's just use little, and use specific ones, even though the farmer doesn't like that as much because they have to buy one for every pest. And there's catalogs with all this stuff too. Natural enemies you can buy and all these organic things. So the big part of this is not just that it's organic and doesn't hurt us, it saves the natural enemies. They use it for pepper maggot fly, but I'm gonna skip over some of this. This is a thing where we do a thing where we also put a little oil in the tip of the silk of corn, and we actually got a patent. One of my students in UMass, and it's a device so that it keeps corn earworm from drilling down into the tip. That's the little earworm that you get in the tip of corn sometimes, which you don't really need to worry about if you sell it at the farm stand. Some advertise, we guarantee a worm in every ear, because then that means they didn't spray it. And you just cut it out, right? But it can get a little fungusy and nasty. And if you sell it to Stop and Shop, they don't want it. So a lot of pest problems are cosmetic pests that, it's like, give me the spots on the apples, but leave me the birds and the bees. They just make a little dimple, it's not hurting you, but they can't sell it at a big market, but you can sell it in a CSA or a farm stand. So one way you can help farmers is to buy from farm stands and CSAs and tolerate a little damage, because, you don't need a spotless apple, because it was produced by spraying if it's spotless. And this is where I want to get into some nice, more insect stories. I mean, the striped cucumber beetle is a fun one. These are lacewings. People ask me what are my favorite insects, and I can never pick a favorite anything, but this is on my top shelf. These and the trichogramma, I just think the trichogramma are so cute, these little tiny insects. And these are lacewings. They're very pretty. They hang out by lights at night. You've probably seen them. Most of them are sip nectar when they're adults, so you can bring them in with flowers. And what we're doing here is trying a food spray, a yeast spray that smells like prey to them, and they come and they eat it, and you build up numbers. Then they lay their eggs, and their eggs are on stalks to protect them from ants and from each other, because when they hatch, they're these little vampires that wander around and they're blind, but they grab anything they can, and they have ice tongue mandibles, and they suck the juices out. So they're voracious pests. This actually didn't work. We tried a food spray to attract them. They all just flew away when we released the adults. But Mary's brother, you can buy the larvae, and you release them in your greenhouse, and they just go crazy eating everything in sight. It's saved as aphid party. Aphids are usually not a big pest. They're a classic secondary pest, but they reproduce like crazy. I'll show you a video in a second about this. And I also work with parasitoids. Yep. Yeah, there's another one. A lot of people like those in greenhouses. This is Hippodamia convergens, and they hibernate in huge piles. They mentioned this. I'll show you this video in a second. And people mine them and put them in little boxes and send them around for you to use. And there's sometimes a problem with a shortage, especially in California. They get a lot of them, and the drought's been hard on them. So I think these guys have to say it's a shortage, but I've been able to get them other places. And people defend their turf. I think, these little trichogramma wasps, again, since I didn't have some live ones, this is a little experiment I do. I do a bunch of experiments with them, but this is one you can just see all those little dots, that's the wasp. And this is just studying when they emerge from the egg. Do they climb, do they drop, do they fly towards the window, do they fly away from the window? So it's a little behavioral experiment. I do a lot of these with my students in the lab. So you can see how small they are. And if you pass this around, yeah, you can look at this one. This is a little experiment where we spray the eggs to see which pesticides kill the eggs. Do some of the organic pesticides kill them in their egg stage if you put them out in the field? And they're a model for other parasitoids. So this is what parasites, a lot of parasites, they just stick their egg in the other egg of other insects and eat them alive. So I'm going to show you a little story about some of these things I've been talking about, so that we'll get to a video, so it's a little more fun for you. So I hope this works.
For that. They're a nightmare for anyone growing veggies. There are thousands of types with all kinds of looks, and they seem to pop up overnight. Before you know it, they're everywhere. They pierce leaves and stems with their stylet and suck out sugary sap.
Is that too loud?
Leaving the plant yellow and wilted. While they're not particularly fast or well armored, aphids are highly skilled at one thing: making babies. Most of the time, they give birth to live young instead of laying eggs. That's different from most other insects. Aw, she's got her mother's eyes. An aphid mom can push out 5 or 6 nymphs a day, sometimes more. And she doesn't need to find a mate to do it. Most of the time, aphids just clone themselves. You can see the eyes of her clones growing inside her. And here's the really wild part. Her babies are born already pregnant. In a week or two, they'll start giving birth to clones of their own. That's why it only takes a single aphid to infest your greenhouse or garden. When the buffet starts getting crowded and it looks like their food might run out, aphids switch gears. They produce a different kind of clone. See those light gray shoulder pads on the one on the right? They unfurl into wings. Yep, winged clones called alates. They look different, but they're still genetically identical to their mothers. When they're ready, the alates take to the air to search out new plants to colonize. A gathering this big attracts some hungry party crashers, like this ladybug. So some aphids strike a deal with ants. The ants treat aphids like dairy cows, looking after them and guarding them from predators. When these ranchers are thirsty, they tap on the aphids with their antennae. But instead of milk, these ant ranchers are looking for a tall drink of sweet aphid honeydew. That's the sugary waste that comes out of an aphid's backside. So is there anything that can stop these aggravating, endlessly self-replicating pests? Some growers use oils or insecticides. Others sick predators on them, like lacewing larvae. Or even unleash parasites, like these wasps. The female wasp uses her sharp ovipositor to inject an egg into the slow-moving aphids. When the wasp egg inside hatches, the larva eats and eats, hollowing out its host and turning it into a little mummy. When it's ready, the adult wasp chews its way out to start the cycle again. These tiny mummies are a gruesome sight, but they're one that let gardeners breathe a sigh of relief. Hi, Deep Peeps, it's Laura. Did your charming image of ladybugs just get shattered? Not to worry, they still have a softer side. Every winter they gather by the thousands in a big old cuddle puddle. Thanks, and see you soon.
I use this book in my class. It's a book about natural enemies, predators and parasitoids. And his chapter on parasitoids, Attacked by Aliens. And he mentions the movie and all that stuff. We all love this. It's kind of gross. I won't show you the scene where it's popping out of John Hurt. I mean, I know about it. I've watched it once. But this is, here it is. There's our aliens. Here's the movie version, and this is the last thing some aphid sees. Or, well, actually, they suffer for a long time after that, actually. So, and this is somebody did the alien life cycle. They lay their eggs somewhere in the spaceship, and then it hatches out and it grabs your face and sticks an egg in you, and then it develops and pops out. If you haven't seen the movie Alien, you should. It's very gruesome. But that's exactly
It's a great movie.
This is exactly what Chica Grandma does. Chica Grandma's an alien. So, and that's part of my research is looking at how pesticides affect them, and we do experiments where it turns out that a lot of the organic pesticides kill these guys too, but not all of them. Neem oil seems to be pretty good, and also what we find is if you just use really low doses, that helps. Mm-hmm. But that's spinosad and soap. We spray soap for aphids. If there's predators, you try to use these when there's not going to be the predators. Use them when you're not flying. Use them when you're not breeding, so that you can be more selective. But some of the organics can be quite hard on natural enemies too, including things like fungicides and other stuff you wouldn't think would be a problem. But so let me see what else. I'm going to run out of time here. I want to go to a couple stories. I do a lot of these things where you're doing pest control and using organic pesticides to see how well they work, and also for resistant varieties, So we've done a lot of experiments with other pests. I'm just going to skip through those. This is one where you try to establish a fungus that attacks insects. This is a student of mine that worked with some people in Maine trying to use Bovaria, which is a fungus that attacks insects. And so you can establish that it's a disease. And in some places, I've heard of this in bananas in Costa Rica, you look for sick insects, put them in a blender, grind them up, and then spray them out. And those diseases help control your insects. So, and if you keep going out to the field and getting evolutions working for you, if you use a lab strain, they'll get used to that. But it's like COVID or anything else, we get resistant to the current strain. So you have to keep looking for new strains so that evolution works in your favor. Same way you really should go to seed saving. So new crops are always, you're using seeds that survive the pests, and you're not using the same crop over and over again that they've learned to eat. Let's see. There's also social aspects to this. I'm just going to whip through this real fast, but it's just the idea that farmers are just part of this food web where they just a little cog in the chain. They get 10% of each dollar, and it's partly because the companies sell them products. They sell to a few stores. Those guys control the market. So one reason to reduce pesticide use is to save the farmer from having to buy an input. So there's an economic benefit, not just saving your natural enemies, but avoiding undue inputs for farmers to have to buy needlessly. So that's another reason. If you can establish a system where the enemies are maintaining themselves, you don't have to buy pesticides. I'm just going to skip into a couple of fun stories before we run out of time. One of the things I worked on was neem in Nicaragua, and they had this. This is also true on an international level too. You're buying and trading and free trade pesticides, and big countries with industrial base sell pesticides to the countries that don't have a big industrial base. So Nicaragua, this was many years ago, got into neem, which is a tree. Neem oil, neem's a tree, and you just extract from it. It's a toxic seed to pesticides. It doesn't hurt us. It's actually a medicinal plant for people. It makes sheep grow a little faster. They can grow the tree all over the country and make their own pesticides from a plant and make soap from the neem also. So it has a byproduct. Yep, question in the back? The neem tree from India, an insecticide for killing multinationals. So it breaks their dependence on importing a whole bunch of pesticides they'd really rather not use. So if you look at this food web, this is the human food web. And what you want to do is look at things that help farmers besides products like CSAs. You sell right to the consumer instead of going through a market, all that kind of stuff. So we're talking about ecosystem and social systems to help farmers and help, you can control pests partly, I think, just by moving product around it. This idea that everybody should grow their own food, I think it's more of network. We all should grow food and then we can share. Like this year was an example. We had a horrible apple crop here. But West Virginia had a surplus. So it should be the norm that everyone grows what they can and then we are prepared to share. And global warming is going to make that more critical, I think, which is, you're never going to know where the drought is anymore. All the years where you got used to various patterns are going to change. So we better get ready to help each other, I think. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to finish real quick. Some of my favorite stories. So some of you probably already know one way to encourage pests is diversity. Lots of plants, then you have lots of herbivores for the predators to eat, and they maintain a complex system that's kind of stable because if one goes down, the other comes in. Right, so it's more stable than a monoculture where you got a couple pests and one predator or no predators, and they just go rise and fall like crazy. So a couple of fun stories. This is a push-pull system in Africa. They have corn plants, and what they found is that they plant a certain legume, Desmodium. It makes an odor that repels. It's a push-pull. It repels the moth that attacks the corn. And corn's a problem because it's an import into Africa. It gets attacked by all kinds of stuff. It left, instead of leaving its predators behind, it's moved into a place where it's not used to them. And there's also a weed that's a parasitic weed that attacks its roots. And this Desmodium secretes a chemical that inhibits that weed. So the African weeds have learned how to survive against this weed, but corn not so much. But if you plant corn with this Desmodium legume, it makes a food for the animals, so it's useful, and it kills that weed. So you get double yields, quadruple yields. It's a huge success. And it's push-pull because there's also grass on the outside that attracts the moths. And these moths that will kill corn, the grass kills them. So, it's a local grass that has learned to adapt to this moth, and it protects the corn by planting a push-pull system. It's a real success story. I should show you some, I guess I won't have time, but I have slides of me visiting some of these in Kenya. And one of them, I could show you the slide, but I may not have time to get to it. One of them was Sarah Obama, Obama's grandmother. So I have this picture of me sitting with Obama's grandmother. I'll show you later if we have time. But then the other famous story I like is coffee. A lot of the people I work with in grad school study shade coffee. And shade coffee helps birds. It's a refuge for the birds. Coffee is usually grown in a big monoculture. I don't know why this is doing this. I did it once before, but I just make it smaller. This is like what a coffee plantation looks like usually. It's a big monoculture. But it used to be grown in polycultures, with trees. It used to be, it likes shade. And so we're kind of going back to shade coffee because it turns out these big monoculture coffee plantations stress the plants and they don't do so well after a while. But it also going back because it's bird habitat. Bird numbers were declining because people were going to non-shade coffee, and that's a lot of places where they overwinter. So these big coffee plantations had other trees growing in there that the birds could use to live in, and people could plant food crops too, et cetera, et cetera. If you do that, it turns out there's an ant that likes to live in there, and it takes up residence in about 3% of the trees, and it's a keystone species. What it does, if you have shade coffee, you have a lot less pest problems. And I love this food, it's a food web story, and some of my students helped figure this out with these guys too. I just want to make this one graph a little bigger. It turns out that the ant brings in a scale insect, kind of like the video showed you of the aphids being tended by ants. And so people thought it was a pest at first. But it turns out that that scale insect carries a fungus, and that fungus, as part of its life cycle, competes with coffee rust. So instead of a bad guy, this is an ant that's bringing in a pest that brings in a fungus that competes with a worse pest fungus. And it helps control the numbers of that fungus. So it's diversity. Your friend is diversity, right?
Yeah.
And then the other little story is this part up here. One of my students did this for Div 3, her senior thesis. That ant's numbers are limited. It's a keystone. It affects all kinds of animals. Like it defends its eggs so much that some parasitoids hide their eggs nearby so it protects them too. So it has ripple effects all through the environment. There's a forward fly that controls it, and it's another one of those fun parasitites. So this is a fly. It's a little fly, not a wasp. It lays its eggs in the head of insects, of ants. They're called decapitating flies. And the head falls off, and the larva develops inside. I have some pictures of that. See if I can. So there's an ant. They're flying towards an ant, and if it gets, it'll sting it behind the head, and then the head gets a larva developing inside and falls off. So this is a way to control fire ants too, and it actually doesn't even have to kill a lot of them. It just scares them so much they disperse. And what my student found out is that they smell where the ants are, but if the ants stop moving, it makes it hard that's one of their defenses. And she called the paper "Parasites Lost," because when they get close following the odor, they can't find the ant because it stops moving. But otherwise what they do, it's famous in leafcutter ants, the farmer ants that plant leaves and farm the fungus. They have hitchhikers that ride on the leaves while they carry it, because the ant carrying the leaf is helpless. And the hitchhiker, I couldn't find this famous Mark Moffat picture, it's a leafcutter ant with his mandibles up trying to bite a fly that's landing over it. But I found another like it. You can just see these leafcutter ants, there's the fly. And these hitchhikers, part of their job, they clean the leaves, they do some other things, but they also will attack those flies when they try to come and lay their eggs on their leafcutter carrying ants, leaf carrying ants. All right, I think that's kind of it.